Oh, now everybody's fired up. Now you've got a warmed up audience now for the morning. All right, welcome back, everyone.
Tell people that they should try not to eat here, or they should not eat here.
Oh, they shouldn't? Okay. Could they drink?
Drink water.
Drink water?
Nothing that stains anything.
Okay. Don't stain anything here. But you guys, they all look like they're very.
What?
They're not going to spill anything. Nobody's going to spill anything. But we'll tell them. Well, yeah, we'll leave our food outside. Because you what? You see a spot?
Proceed.
Okay. All right, welcome. I hope you all had a good night, and we're excited now to start up. This is a big. We're gonna have a very big dolphin morning coming up here. We're all very excited for these upcoming talks. So Denise, why don't you take this away? Okay, we shouldn't be eating food in here, some housekeeping. And also, yeah, just a big thanks to Frances, who's not here. Is she here yet?
No,
We will, but we'll say it later.
Taking care of
Who-
furniture out of the backyard today, this morning, later.
Okay, later. But if you see her, we'll thank her as well for helping with last night. Take it away. We're excited to hear from Denise Herzing on dolphins.
All right, we on? Everybody hear me all right? Okay, so good morning. Here we are. Like we said, we have a dolphin morning this morning. And Thad Starner and I are going to present this first talk. The way we've decided to do it is I'm going to do the first half. I'm going to introduce you to our work, but also to the dolphins, so you get a kind of a background, how we collect data, who the dolphins are. And especially because Mark is following us with a talk about video and sound, the work he's been doing with us. So I'm going to start, and Thad will jump in, go over more of the technical details for you machine learning folks. So we've been working out in the Bahamas since 1985 every summer to collect data, and it's one of the few places still in the world where you can observe dolphins on a regular basis underwater, and it's clear water, which makes it great. In 2010, we joined forces with Georgia Tech to help us design some cutting-edge technology that we thought we would start using. So there are two ways that we approach decoding dolphins. The first is to process their natural sounds and behavior, like a lot of people we've heard. So we want to understand the individuals, the society, obviously correlate sound and behavior. And as the computer guys are training me, we need lots and lots of data, more data, data-hungry models. The second way to decode dolphins is to develop a two-way interface or keyboard. And believe it or not, dolphins have quite a history of researchers trying to do this in various modes. Diana Reese has done work along with a nice lineup. And in that case, you need a couple different things. You need motivated dolphins. Obviously, you need technology. And you need real-time sound recognition, if you can, to really get feedback for the dolphins. So I'm going to talk about the first part, how we collect their natural sounds and how we look at the society. So in most places in the world, you can't really see underwater. And so if you're looking at a dolphin leap, you don't know, is it play, is it aggression? You're not sure. So we work underwater primarily with underwater video, with the hydrophone. We write up data when we get out of the water, and we've done this for 40 plus years now. So our data set, which is all annotated, is quite diverse. So this is just an example. There's some dolphins, nice clear water, yay. So this is considered a play fight. This is one individual, and then you'll see his little coalition kind of chasing him. So that's what we see underwater, which gives us the data. We work in the northern Bahamas. Bahamas is an archipelago nation. So there's a lot of nice shallow sandbank. It's relatively safe for researchers to be in the water. And we have a live-aboard power catamaran. So we go out for 4 to 5 months every summer. We live there, we sleep there, we eat there, and it's mobile platform, obviously. So we go where the dolphins are, drop our anchor, spend time with them as much as we can. So the species are Atlantic spotted dolphins, and their calves don't have spots when they're born, and they get they give spots over time. So this older spotted dolphin, she's 35 years old in this shot. That's Muggsy. And we ID them from classic techniques, dorsal fins, nicks, and notches. But because they have spots, we also use this information. We work underwater, so we have a lot of full body photos. We use their spot patterns, like constellations of stars. And we've done work with Jason. Where's Jason? to do fluke books, to do training on dolphin ID for citizen science. Of course, dolphins are great acousticians. We know they produce and hear sounds way above our hearing, 200 plus kilohertz. But they have pretty good vision, especially species that live in the tropics. And they have some cross-modal abilities between sound and vision. They have taste, which is a chemical sense, and they have touch, very important sense for dolphins. And they have the abilities to touch each other with sound. So that's another feature to look for when you're studying dolphins. Now, the metadata we collect, which is kind of the big picture overall, we can sex our dolphins, so we know males and females, and they're streamlined. All their genitalia is internal, so luckily they flash us occasionally, and we can see mammary slits for the females and other male parts as needed. We track reproductive cycles, so we know their calving periods, whose calves belong to mothers, when they first give birth. And the great thing about this species that I was just looking for a place in the world where I could observe underwater, but the great thing about spotted dolphins is that they have very clear age classes, especially when you're tracking the same individuals. So we know, when they get certain spots, they become juveniles or young adults or old adults. So that's really an important part of their metadata because they have very long developmental periods where they learn, a lot of social learning. And we track things like male alliances. We use coefficients of association just to measure who hangs out with who, basically. So this is all the metadata. I kind of think of it as an anthropological overview about who are the individuals, who's the society, how do they communicate with each other, what's their life like, and then try to use those kinds of data to interpret. So mothers and calves, for example, they nurse for 3 to 4 years. So there's a lot of learning. There's a lot of passive observation by the calves, learning the mother's signals. Oh, here's a little video which might play. Whoops. Let's see. Hopefully this is not too loud. There we go. Anyway, strongest bond in the society, so very tight relations between mothers and calves. We have juvenile males, just an example of some more play behavior. This is actually, I can hear it too. This is a young male coalition learning how to basically chase an individual. Ooh, so a lot of learning, a lot of practice in their formations. And then this is some adult male behavior. So once they're mature, they learn how to be dolphins. These are older males now, kind of, it's like the social huddle with sperm whales, I guess. It's all huddled together. There's one guy that's kind of vertical. They're kind of picking on him. Anyway, and most of the time we're just using passive observation, using our underwater video and sound. They are interactive sometimes, which we'll talk about. But our classic way of just looking at our video and logging it is to run the spectrogram, run the video, and annotate it into a database. Anyway, cacophony of sounds. So we have some basic correlations with sound and behavior already. We haven't decoded any specifics, but so dolphins have frequency modulated whistles. And as we understand it, most dolphins have a signature whistle, which is an individual name per se. They also have other kinds of frequency modulated whistles. They use burst pulse sounds. These are less studied than whistles because they're hard to categorize. That's one of the reasons we're really trying to use computers to help us categorize these whistles. They aren't ducks. Those are actually dolphins. And then we have sonar. And they use that for navigation, hunting. And then they use their echolocation clicks in tight packets, high repetition rates, for sounds called buzzes. And buzzes are used in courtship. They're used when mothers discipline calves and used for chasing away sharks. So they have a lot of functions. again, they have a lot of frequency components that are unique too. Now, burst pulses are really hard to categorize, and this is human speech. Looking at it, prairie dogs have interesting looking sounds, and dolphins. So it's just a matter of how to categorize them and try to interpret them. Now, another problem with dolphins is directionality and recordings. So dolphins are directional senders of sound and directional receivers of sound through their lower jaw, which goes to basically a mammalian inner ear. They can really mess with researchers if you're trying to get a head-on sound. They can internally point their sound to about 20 degrees. So you might think you're getting a head-on sound, but actually the animal internally is maybe pointing the sound a little bit with their melon, apparently. They have 2 sound generators, so they can make 2 sounds at the same time, a whistle and a squawk, click, et cetera, et cetera. And they can also merge, this is how good they are with sound, they can merge clicks from each sound generation area into one click. So that's pretty, I'm not sure why they do that, but they can do it anyway. So it makes for deciphering challenging. Of course, we've evolved our equipment over the years to do high frequency recordings. So you see the lower left, you see the typical spectrogram in narrowband. The whole thing is broadband up to 110 kilohertz and higher. And what happens, of course, is you start seeing more information, harmonics. We knew sounds like clicks and burst pulses were broadband, but what's also interesting is down here where there's no detection in the narrowband, you wouldn't even know that sound existed if you weren't doing high frequency, right? So that's a really important thing. Of course, like any species, you have to get into their sensory zone. Like I was saying, they're very directional. This is horizontal and vertical measurements of their clicks, and you can see head-on, you really get the full signal. As soon as you go off axis, the frequency drops off pretty severely. So again, very directional information to understand. Problem number 3 is multimodal signal integration. And the way we do it, like you saw a little bit, is we'll take our video clips and we have an ethogram with coding for our behaviors. And in some kind of time series, like 5 minutes of video, whatever it is, we'll look at the stream of information, we'll code it. We have head-to-head, some play, head-to-head, courtship. That's on one time series. And then we'll take the video off of it, also try to code it as best we can. This is where technology really has been handy. To code vocalizations, same kind of thing. We would have a stream of vocalizations, screams, whistles, some buzzes, echolocation. Same thing, and then we would just try to match up what's going on with their behavior to our best of our abilities. Localizing the vocalizer, still a problem with most dolphin work. So a big thing is we try to categorize sounds, we try to match sounds with behavior, obviously. And we're trying to look for language-like structures. We've done some preliminary work with machine learning. Now we have more advanced programs, DolphinGemma, which Thad's going to talk about in some detail, that we're just starting to utilize and get into. And the hope is that with our metadata, ages, sexes, their relationship, that will help us interpret the visual and sound patterns. And that's where the challenge comes in. Now, a lot of animal communication researchers deal with this issue. Is it a referential signal or is it a graded signal, right? So signature whistles are kind of thought to be referential. They refer to an individual. Dolphin head-to-heads, like you heard the squawk sequence. There's a lot of graded information, intensity, numbers of sounds per unit time, et cetera. And we use both, of course. I'm waving my hands and I'm talking at the same time. So that's a big question, whether they really have words or some kind of a reference in their natural language. We know from other species, vervet monkeys, they label predators by alarm calls. We know Kon Slobodchikov's amazing work with prairie dogs, where he also has alarm calls that are unique to predators. And again, you look at it as a researcher historically, you might think they're kind of the same kind of sounds, alarm calls, but the experimental work has really shown how they label sounds. And like I said, dolphin signature whistles are the one place we kind of know that they have a referential signal. So the question is, do they have other things they want to label? You can imagine it might be pretty fun to label a shark, a type of shark, and alert your group. The data's hard to get because we're usually getting out of the water too. So it's a little hard if any brave volunteers want to come out and swim with sharks and dolphins, but we try. So one of the things that we developed some years ago is called Uhura, for the Star Trek fans, what that represents. Oops, sorry. So the idea was that mining your data is just so hard, and you want to correlate with visual. So we designed a system with Daniel Kohlsdorf and Thad to be able to query our database a little more efficiently. So for example, in the end, we ended up with 8 types of up whistles, 8 types of down whistles, 8 types of burst pulses. And then the system let us query, okay, here's an audio file. Find me the exact match of that sequence. So if it was a signature whistle, for example, you could put in the physical, the audio file and see what it pulled out from all your data set. It would also query by just saying, show me a dense region of vocalizations. So you could maybe find some patterns and then look at the coding. And then finally, the symbolic labeling, as you see here, like the whistle on the left is UD, UA, UH. If I would put that symbolic stream into the data set, I could look for something that matched that. And it would give you sort of the exact match, and then on down, closer you get. Thad's going to go into more of the details on that process, some of the findings that Daniel found with, it was his PhD, which was great. So this is, as someone who works with the data hands-on, mining the data is so time intensive, right? So that's why we need all those great technologies. What we're hoping to do with DolphinGemma, we're just getting into it, is to explore, remember it's a generative AI, so you prompt it with a sound at this point in time at least, and it tells you, it's trained on our acoustic data. So the idea would be to see if you found a sound sequence like ACDG, and you look on the video, what's going on in the video. When you see the sequence, then, okay, maybe it means dive to the bottom, right? You've seen it with the video. So playback, I think, is going to be really important. I'm not historically a huge fan of playback because you don't know what you're playing back. But I think if we find some sound patterns that make sense with our underwater video, we could try some playback. Another example, same kind of thing. You find a sequence of sound, CFFT. You match it with behavior from the underwater video, and a mom is disciplining a calf statistically. Now, I was thinking about someone mentioned the fail-safe question, I think it was Adam maybe, where it's like, how do you know the sound sequence means I'm hungry or I'm diving to the bottom, right? How do you get to that ultimate interpretation? And I was thinking about for something like a mother chasing a calf, it would be pretty easy to look at one of the components like T or C and say, is it different between the sequences, a little different? Because you might suspect the mom is calling the calf with his or her signature whistle, right? So you could start looking at that as a way to be a fail-safe for interpretation. So that's one thought. I don't know if you could do it with other kinds of sound sequences, but we'll have to see. So that's kind of the big picture of how we do sound and behavior. Now I'm going to just go into a little bit our two-way interface, which is the underwater computer. So again, there's a history of animal communication with technology, especially with species that can't mimic, like a parrot mimics perfect words, but when you're dealing with primates, you've got a physical keyboard. That's Sue Savage-Rumbaugh working with Kanzi. And on the right, a very cool experiment they did at Epcot Center, Walt Disney, where they had a keyboard where the human and the dolphin worked together. By triggering infrared beam, the dolphin would point to one of those buckets. There's an object in there, and anyway, they would say, let's go to the reef and play, that kind of thing. So first time ever for an underwater dolphin human keyboard, and it was a pretty interesting work. Anyway, out in the wild, so we were in the wild, so we started noticing that the dolphins started doing spontaneous physical mimicry and spontaneous vocal mimicry in some sense. And we thought, wow, it's because it's an interactive situation a lot of the time. And we thought, could we offer them some technology to try to match at what they're reaching out to do? We weren't quite sure. We thought, And I remember I queried my colleagues who had done a lot of captive two-way work, and they all thought it was a pretty interesting situation. Anyway, so we decided to sort of go for it, and that's where Thad came in and Mr. Underwater Wearable Computer. So this is the original chat system, and it's basically an acoustic keyboard at this point in time. The divers wear the boxes. They operate a keypad, which is loaded with synthetic whistles, a very small amount that are outside the dolphin's repertoire, but they label objects that the dolphins like to play with. The researcher has a bone-conducting headphone, so we can hear what's been put out by the computer and if there's matches. And we have real-time sound recognition if the dolphins mimic or do some kind of partial mimic. It alerts the researcher that someone's trying to mimic the sound. And we use a model rivalry technique that Irene Pepperberg used to basically use another human in the water, so there's a little competition, and then they see how the system operates. If they make a mimic of this whistle, they might be able to get this toy. And currently, DolphinGemma, like I said, is a generative AI model, and with this work, how we're using DolphinGemma is to train the recognizer to do better if the dolphins do a mimic, but it's not an exact mimic. Again, Thad's going to show you some images of that. So that's kind of how we're using DolphinGemma this summer. And it's tricky because we actually practice using this equipment without the dolphins because we want to make sure we have our stuff together and can interact and exchange toys human to human. And we look for, I call them windows of opportunity, where the dolphins already are playing with us with a game. We try not to disturb their natural behavior. So if they're just doing their natural behavior and playing, we just don't even go there. We just watch them and do our normal passive observation. And within a given summer or 2 or 3 years, we identify the best candidates, which is done kind of through personality measures. And we try to maximize our time with those individuals. We seek them out. And they're just candidates who like to work with us. They're usually young female dolphins. They have more free time. They're not reproducing yet. So there's a lot of play time that that particular age group has. So the idea is that diver A and diver B are both wearing the chat system. Diver A might play the scarf whistle. So the dolphin hears it as a whistle in the water. Diver B hears the whistle, but also the computer's saying the scarf was played. Or diver B is playing sargassum whistle, same thing. Dolphin hears it as a whistle. Diver A knows sargassum whistle has been played. And the divers might be playing with this actual toy at the same time. The hope is the dolphins mimic the whistle. We hear it, and the computer system says, okay, and we have a female voice. If the dolphin makes a whistle, a male voice if one of the boxes is working, so we can differentiate a box mimic versus a dolphin. And then the idea is they get the toy and we play, and that's the motivation, right? It's purely social motivation, things they already do with us. So we published this work, but I just wanted to sort of show you one of the things they did initially, which kind of doesn't surprise me, is they used their signature whistle a lot after. This is a computer sound for scarf. We have a start and stop tone, but that's actually the contour for the scarf. And they used their signature whistle a lot. They probably thought maybe our whistles were our signature whistle, which we actually have given ourselves signature whistles, turns out anyway. But the other thing they did is they attached their own little whistle. This is the computer whistle for sargassum. And where it sweeps up there in the boxed area, that's their mimic of that whistle. So they really were exploring kind of how to mimic, at least that's what we think they were doing. They mimicked in an extra special way. Again, Thad's going to go into that. And I guess you're on.
Okay.
Great. So
I should say I am the technician here. So if you have any biology questions, please talk to Denise. I came this from as an AI researcher as well as a wearable computing person. For those of you who know me through wearable computing land, this is a Vuzix Z100. I'm using it for my time check right now. But we have a unique set of skills in my research group for making wearable computers in weird situations, as well as in doing AI. And so for 2000, and I should mention, I'm not just the technician, I'm the technician manager. Most of this work is done by Charles Ramey and Scott Gilliland, Celeste Mason. Some of the DolphinGemma stuff is being done by Glenn, who's here in the audience right now. Tom and Lauren are helping out as well. So most of this is just me trying to organize things. But what we started out with is realizing that a lot of activities can be clustered based off of time or space. And we started this with things like GPS traces on human behaviors. We can actually discover semantically meaningful locations just from a GPS trace. And we just looked for how long you stop at any given place. We can predict where you're going to go next. This sort of stuff is now part of the algorithms in your cell phone. And we did this back in about 2003. Then we started looking at human activities. This is an exercise routine. And this is just accelerometers on your wrists. And so the top one is an accelerometer, the bottom was a gyro, I believe. And from this, we can quickly figure out, just by visualization, that there are 6 different exercises you're doing. You can see how they band out here. This is just simple visualization stuff. There's nothing more than some simple clustering material so far. But we can eventually, automatically, not knowing anything about the sensors, not knowing anything about the data per se, we have algorithms that can segment out, discover these 6 different motifs which happen to correspond to 6 different exercises. And we can get about 97% accuracy unsupervised. Right? It does not know anything about the signal. It just says, hey, it looks like these things cluster. It looks like they cluster into these 6 things. Actually, it turns out to be 7. One of the things is the person was wiping their head with a towel during exercise. So that is something I'm not showing here. But it automatically got all 6 exercises in the 32 routines and labeled them at 97% accuracy. And so the benefits of having an unsupervised system is that there's no hand segmentation. You're not providing examples for stuff. You can mark and ignore uninteresting things like wiping the forehead, and it removes the subjectivity from it. So when you're dealing with folks who are trying to diagnose autism or look at human behavior, you're taking a lot of activities of daily living for older adults. It kind of takes all that subjectivity out. You now have a consistent tool that you can apply over and over again and see trends in behavior. So we can use the same tool for many problems. We did it for optical character, things we know the answer to: exercise, optical character recognition, speech, American Sign Language, physiological signals, GPS travel patterns, and all this is in David Minin's PhD dissertation from 2008. So if you want to see some these days routines that are very fast to run on your computer and are kind of like the first pass to try anything on your data, the dissertation is a great way to get started. The question is, though, what can we do with this algorithm back in 2008? What can we do with this that would actually improve science? Right? And the answer was Denise. I gave a extra credit in my AI course to find me the largest data set of animal behavior out there that we could actually apply these algorithms to. And one of my students, Saul, in my class, just in my AI course, had contacted Denise, and she agreed to meet with us. And pretty soon I was down there with her talking about, hey, can we actually run this on your data set? And this was 2010. She also happened to mention that she'd had this old two-way communication work with like a keyboard she was pushing through the water for the dolphins to indicate with their rostrum which thing to select, and how that was just impossible to do in the water because you can't keep up with the dolphins with this huge awkward thing. And I said, well, if you want to do it acoustically, I make wearable computers. This sounds like a summer project for us. We're quite good at this stuff. And of course now it's 15 years later, and we're finally got something that works. Turns out waterproofing stuff for seawater is surprisingly hard, especially when you find out your hydrophones are not waterproof and your connectors aren't either. So we'll get into that in a little bit. But as Denise was saying, we started looking at these automatic clustering algorithms we had and being able to start labeling her data sets. So this was an interesting exercise for us, and we took the fundamental smallest units that we could and started looking for strings of them that might indicate some visual behavior. Now the first thing you want to do with this is just look for interesting diagrams, right? You have your fundamental units, as Denise described these before, 8 up whistles, 8 down, 8 burst pulse units. And we look for their co-occurrence, right? The simplest thing you can do, bigrams. And as you can see, things pop out, right? The darker spots are the ones that are more commonplace. Great, right? Clearly we got something here that is more common. Does it indicate anything interesting? Don't know yet. But we can also start looking at things like how many times do these different versions look and different transitions happen. Right? So just the same way we did stuff with trying to predict where you're going to go next in your physical location using GPS, we can try to figure out where you're going to go next in your vocalizations as well. And so we can actually look for the most common bigrams. Here's the standard, here's the top, I don't know, 30 or so bigrams, and you can see how the percentages, and there's a lot of stuff up here in the top front, right, where we can take a look at things. So great, okay, simple stuff, we're getting there. But we also then can actually have a visualizer, and I think Mark is going to show a lot more of this in a little bit here. But this is our first visualizer, where we basically just said, okay, here are the features we're discovering, here's an example of the instances of that, and here's when the spectrogram where we find them, and the different colors show you where they are. So that allows us to get a first pass at this sort of stuff, kind of use humans' visual ability to look for patterns, but we can also start looking at the clusters ourselves. So if we have our clusters and we just label them A through L in this case, we can start looking at taking apart segments and constructing them according to our fundamental units. From that, we can start trying to induce a grammar. It turned out for Daniel's Kohlsdorf's work, now this is a dissertation of 2015, okay, so this is 10 years ago. He tried lots of different grammar-inducing things, and it ended up being that regular S expressions were the most predictive of what we had, which was quite a surprise, but showed that there was some regularity in what the dolphins were doing.
What's the regular S expression?
So your grammars are so you have like A, B or C, A through Z star as many times as you want, this sort of thing. So.
You said fundamental units, but like what makes you think these are good segmentations? Or
purely the same unsupervised clustering. So it seems to be a consistent unit that isn't subdividable, and like we see the same acoustic segment occurring regularly and not in any subportion. Right? And then you actually see it happen repeatedly. You have a list of those things. Yeah?
Are you using the segmentation across different individuals and across pods?
Yes. So for all of Denise's data, and she has the north group and the south group. How many, in your data sets, how?
Well, there's about 100 animals in one community, and that's where most of the data is from. About 10 plus years ago, we had some climate change food crash thing that happened, and half our animals moved to a secondary location. But it's mostly from one community that had kind of subclusters, but they're considered one community. So.
And so now the question is, can we actually look at these sequences and predict from the acoustics the visual behavior? So in the first one, AEL, does that predict head-to-head interactions? Does JC, HKH, does that predict an upcoming tail slap? For Daniel's dissertation, what we found is that indeed he could do a lot of things where he got the signature whistles from the dolphins, which is good, right? We know they exist. And when he found the particular sequences that correspond to those signature whistles, yes, according to the visual ID as labeled by Denise and her partners, indeed they showed up well. And so he got a pretty good correlation between his fundamental units, his chain of motifs, and the visual behavior. Now, the other thing is this is something that Denise set up for him. Can we actually go from the acoustic to the visual and see if there's good correlation between the acoustic and the visual? And indeed, for the 4 categories that Denise set up for Daniel, we indeed got a pretty good correlation between the sound and the acoustic. Now, this is where things get a little bit more interesting with DolphinGemma. So DolphinGemma is something that is a depth former, and it's using our recently open sourced tokenizer called Magenta, which just came out, a couple weeks ago, Glenn? And so eventually we're going to try to get this thing out there so everybody can play with it. And it's trained off of Denise's data. And we're getting we're getting better and better training it with the data. Now, so what we're hoping eventually to do is in the off season when Denise is not on the boat so much, We hope to drop that in to Daniel's previous system and try to get better and better motifs and better predictive systems. So that's the longer term goal. And we will talk about the short term goal here in a second. But if you are interested in that tokenizer, how that works, you can talk to Glenn afterwards. The depth former, I think there's something similar out there called an RQ transformer you can find in the literature. Just go to Google Scholar, you can find it. And so you can kind of see the sort of space we're playing in with the DolphinGemma model. Now, one thing we're doing right now is using DolphinGemma in a generative mode. So let me, and I'll tell you why this is so important in a second here. So you prompt it with a file, and then DolphinGemma provides you with a synthesized acoustic thing. So here's our original. This is the squawks that we just heard, I believe. I guess it's a different one. Sorry. And then this is DolphinGemma's output. And so you can see that it works pretty well for the first 3 seconds or so, which is all we need, as you'll see in a second, and then starts drifting off into all sorts of noise. Now, why do I care about this? Why do I care about being able to generate these short 3-second things? This is the chat work that Denise just talked about, and this is an early version of it. I'm going to have a brief, the versions here for hard people. How many people here make hardware for underwater stuff? Anybody? Yeah, he does. Okay. So this is dedicated to you because only you are going to appreciate this. Making underwater hardware that when you're trying to do state-of-the-art equipment is so painful. This is one of our first versions of it. You know, this is actually a pool speaker that we got off of Alibaba. It did not work very well for very long. It turns out that trying to make something that is waterproof, that contains like a GPU and a high-end processor and everything is just, it's so nasty. You get electronic noise injected into your audio, right? You got wires everywhere that get tangled up. And you got people in the ocean, so you don't want to get them, caught in their own net of wires. And so you got to do everything about, clothing and connectors and it's everything we do on body for wearable computers just gets worse. And one of the biggest problems is simply making a good speaker to get enough power into the water so the dolphins can hear you. This is the original system. Why buy it? Yours truly is a stylish model. This is this is a speaker made by our researcher Scott Gilliland, and it is a piezoelectric element with a particular type of resin on top of it to do impedance matching with the water around it. And of course, people make speakers for air, not for incompressible fluids. Right? And so the equivalent of this for the US Navy is a 200-watt amplifier on deck with a wire going down to a speaker that's this big, literally, that allows them to do this stuff. And we're trying to put it on body with a lithium battery that hopefully doesn't explode on our world-famous researcher, and try to get enough power out here. And so this has been a long, painful process. Now, we finally got something that worked about 2015. We actually got the system working in the water. It was consistent. We figured out how to stop the corrosion on our plugs using silicone grease. We figured out how to get the stuff going, but it still required one of us being on board with Denise for every single trip. And this is, this takes up a slot of her research team, and it was not really sustainable. Even worse yet, when you put this thing on, you see all the straps here? Well, it takes you a while to get those all adjusted, right, to get in the water. Because you don't have them adjusted in the water. When you go and go off the side of the boat, it wants to do this, and then you have an unconscious researcher in the water that you gotta go fish out. Now, fortunately, it never happened because we tested for that, but it meant that trying to get this hardware on quickly whenever she's got some good players in the water was really, really difficult. So we started to make a different system. This is called a Chat Lite. This was the Wonder Woman bracelets that we were trying to make. And so we're going to separate this. So this is now the speaker. It's, again, another custom-made speaker here. And amplifier where it's custom hardware running at the bleeding edge of what's possible. And a waterproof keyboard, of course. And this is an LCD reflective screen that shows her what she's playing. Charge ports, that sort of stuff. And we're going to marry that to this, which was our Chat Junior, and this would just do the recognition. Well, as it turns out, that while we started with a PC with a Jetson, for those of you who know what the GPUs are, a Jetson NVIDIA GPU back in the early days, eventually we discovered that we can just do this with a Pixel 9. That makes things so much easier. So if you get 192 kilohertz into your box through USB, we have a great mic for you that's from those audio files, the people who believe they can hear up to 100 kilohertz. Those folks have a nice microphone we can use for calibrating your speakers. It works great for us. It goes to USB. We've hacked the kernel on Android so that you can actually just download it and reprogram your Pixel 9. Now you can get 192 kilohertz or 2 channels if you want, streaming into your Android audio layers and make things work. Now, why 192? Well, when we're doing the two-way work, it's just the whistles, right? So Denise was showing you ones like, all right? That's our scarf whistle. The problem is that when we actually did this with our original systems, which are just looking for just that, because we thought they would actually do something that's very similar, what they did is they went up an octave, right? And so instead of going, I can't even do this, but basically, right? And so we had to actually go to much higher frequencies, and that's why we've had to go with this, what's called a UMIC and a Pixel 9 to do it. Now, what other thing that has changed, what we can do, let me see if I can, I don't know if you can see it on this one, but we also found that you can use a surface exciter. Now, what's that? So if you think about the voice coil on the back of a speaker, right, you have your diaphragm and your voice coil. That actually is what drives that speaker cone, right? Well, people sell something called surface exciters where you can just put it on your sheetrock and make your sheetrock into a speaker. And it turns out we can actually just put one of those surface exciters on our acrylic plate, and it gets enough power, we found out this year, enough power in the water that it works. And so now all our complicated hardware that we had, all sorts of amplifiers and GPUs and everything, now it's down to a Pixel 9 cell phone, an amplifier, or actually 2 amplifiers, this surface exciter, the U-mic, and then lots of waterproof connectors that if you need to find small waterproof connectors, come talk to us, because you got to get the right vendor and the right gender in order to make it work. All right, the other thing you got to do now is make this stuff another stylish model. This is Noah. He actually helped us figure out how to make this stuff stay on. You now have a bone conducting transducer so that you can talk to the human and not to the dolphins. And so whenever she pushes a button, it actually announces rope in the bone conducting transducers going directly to the cochlea on her head. And to my surprise, this really does not transmit in the water very well. So we tried this recently. Are the dolphins hearing us talking to Denise? And the answer seems to be no, because when we amplify it and play it, we can't hear it. So that's good news. Eventually, we ended up with a 3D printed thing that goes underneath the straps. We've gotten very good at this now. It turns out there's a particular type of underwater metal detector that actually has headphones. Those headphones turns out to be worthwhile for this. We repackage them and put it into the strap. And now we can actually give the interface back to Denise, so whenever the dolphins mimic us, she can actually hear it in a female voice saying scarf. Whereas whenever she pushes a button and we're producing it, or a box is producing a scarf, it'll say it in a male voice, scarf, and she can tell the difference. Now, she talked about the VCMs, so the vocal mimics. This is what I want to see, right? And that's a real example from our ABC paper. This is what they sometimes do that Denise showed. And the first time I saw that, I was like, you didn't tell me that they're going to just mess with us. You know, the dolphins are just playing like jazz musicians now. They're just riffing off our sounds. And then, what's this? Right? What is that? So it turns out what they're doing is they're doing click, 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 click. And what they're doing is click, 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 and it actually produces something that sounds like our whistles, except with these weird banding. And so how do you train a machine learning system when you have so few examples, so little time with the dolphins? How do you train a machine learning system to recognize what they're doing, especially when you're doing it on a phone, you have a loon mouse size for the model? And so that's where we began to go back to DolphinGemma. And we say, okay, start mimicking us these different whistles. So we're going to prompt you with the whistles we're doing with that we're expecting, and we're going to hopefully get out things that are more like what the dolphins might respond with. And this is from our earliest model with Kathleen's work. And we got some nice whistles, and then we started getting stuff that, when I played it, sounded like what we call these VCM3s. And that was a surprise to me because I had no other way to produce those. And so when DolphinGemma started producing that, I got very excited. Now, we still have a lot of work to do to actually get this stuff to be consistent. But right now, you know, I can produce hundreds of these things and then select the 10% that I think might be used for helping train up the relatively simple CNN we currently have on the phone, at least until we get DolphinGemma on the phone, which should happen hopefully by next year. The other thing we've discovered is we can do this stuff synthetically. This is as of 2 weeks ago. We can actually do these double clicks and produce these bands ourselves, working to make these things more and more like what the dolphins are. But for right now, what we can do is we can actually prompt DolphinGemma with this and hopefully get out stuff that's more dolphin-like for training our mimic recognizer. This is work by Tom Denton. I asked him to just take his birdsong stuff, take in our very clean scarf whistle, and mess it up for us. And so he took the bird models and just ran through that, did a style transfer, and got this thing out. So we can actually use that to help make our model more tolerant. Now, of course, when we're doing the two-way work, there's the 10 seconds after we play something to the dolphins, and we want to be very tolerant of what we match. But when they are actually in just asking for something in standalone mode, we have to raise the threshold. So it's still a very difficult problem in that we have to have multiple models here for, is it a box that's talking to us or a dolphin that's talking to us? Is it something where we want to be loose with our threshold because it was immediately after we started interaction? Or do we want to have it tight because it's something where they're coming up and messaging us? And that is it for me. Thank you very much, and we got a question.
Just pass the microphone for questions. Who's the?
Real quick, just about that last slide. Wouldn't you need the perturbations to somehow match how the dolphin is going to perturb the signal, or
this is yes. So this was just something we're trying because Tom had the model. Why not try it? Making the thing more tolerant, right, is just the general thing, and we can compare this to the dolphins. And this is like brand new stuff. Tom was doing this literally while she was out to sea, and I'm trying to give her more tolerant models. So yeah, the question is, we can now set this into Daniel's system and say, hey, do you have stuff that looks like this, right? And so we can compare this to the dolphins and say, hey, is this reasonable or not? Right now, we got to do some more work, but.
I think it's important to remember, initially, his team of scientists, they had to hand create the potential mimics. So they had, stretch out the time, stretch out the frequency, make it kind of wavy. So that's how we generated potential signals. So we could say, let's accept this as a match, but not this. And now this is, of course, very much ahead of things.
Yeah. So our original synthetic stuff, this is what we start with, right? It's very clean. Then we add ocean noise, and we do all sorts of frequency warps and dynamic time warps and that sort of stuff. But it still looks very human, right? like annoyingly so. And you should see our VCM3s, right? We're basically taking click trains that we got from the big database, and we're cutting and pasting them together, trying to make it look like something real. And of course, it doesn't really sound right. It doesn't really look right. And so, when I got excited was, the first time in the first model that came out with DolphinGemma, when I saw something that looked so much better than what we could do manually, I got very excited. And my focus, and this is one of the things we're trying to do right now with the model, is kind of do a style transfer thing instead of just the DolphinGemma was originally made to our prompt. DolphinGemma was originally made to go into that box on that phone to try to recognize the dolphin whistles faster than our current system. It turns out that the real use case ended up being making the data, doing the data augmentation. And so we're trying to change things around to that now. Yeah?
Okay. Do I get to go because I have the microphone and then you can go? Okay. I'm just curious, the negative space frequency thing, the VCM3, is that something that doesn't exist outside of mimic experiments? Have you gone back now through 40 years of data and found them?
No, it actually can be an artifact. It can be an artifact when an echolocation click bounces either from denser, the bottom, or the surface. Yes, totally can be an artifact. And we see it in our data, absolutely.
Okay.
Our criteria for the mimic was within 5 seconds after playing a contour sound, did it match that? So, and then the question as well, is it random? Is it really a mimic? Are they intentionally somehow doing this negative space thing?
Yeah.
So we went in via Mark Lammer's, who's an acoustician, suggestion to attenuate the secondary pulses to get rid of that in case it's bounce, and then recreate the FFT to make sure it was actually real and created. So we think they're intentionally somehow creating those.
Yeah.
And what's really interesting is I hadn't been looking for that kind of communication signal in the data at all. So yeah, we're definitely going to go back and look at it. So
Yeah, I'd be curious to see, with your whatever the 16 categories, if you include that as a 17th category, if they're being used in a similar way in a natural context or in a outstanding way during these experiments. I think that'd be really cool.
Daniel's original work, the PhD student, his clustering pulled them out completely out of the data set really well. So we have a way to get there quickly to see what's going on with the video. But yeah, I know, it's bizarre.
And now as part of my team has been going through a lot of the audio where we've had mimics in the past. Denise has done this great paper that kind of says how many times do these different types of responses happen from the dolphins when we're doing the two-way work. And we're now looking at that data set and pulling out things that are these buzzes, these burst pulses versus just echolocation clicks versus whistles. And one of the experiments I want to do is see if we can actually fine tune for a particular type of vocalization. But another thing that was very, I guess, exciting and annoying at the same time is,
That's the best stuff.
yeah. Well, over 50% of the responses look like this, right? So they're doing this over 50% of the time, according to Denise's calculations in that paper, and not trying to give us these pure whistles, which is what we were trying to do with the two-way work in the first place. So we have to deal with this, right? This is the way they want to respond.
Right.
Well, that's why the fact that they occur naturally, even before you started chat,
Right.
becomes a really interesting, what is the social context that they use them naturally, and why are they, I assume it sounds like orders of magnitude more frequent in this context is something really cool.
It's another good example of the literature was always captive work and they mimic tonal sounds. We went out in the wild and tried that, but they're showing us, like you said, probably their preferred way of mimicking, which opens up a whole ooh, do they use this for their communication? I mean, so yeah. Big thing to look at for sure.
And I'll ask for sympathy from the hardware team going, dude, how do you deal with that, right? Because now I got to process this stuff in real time. But fortunately, the phones now have enough horsepower in them that we have a chance of doing it, and it's starting to work. And I think Mark here has the model that we're currently using And I think it's a pretty straightforward model right now for what we're using for the recognition. But the big thing is just giving it enough examples that it can handle this variability.
Yeah, and I'm going to follow up with you about the whole acoustic sequence querying past audio files.
Oh, yeah.
That seems really useful.
Well, wait to see what Mark's got. He just showed me some new stuff as of last night. So
Okay.
Hi, so I'm
now I'm in trouble.
always so uncomfortable with LLMs for making generative models because of how much they hallucinate in this, sneaky, devious way where it looks okay, but it's really not at all.
Yep.
And so, how can we? What makes you why should we be comfortable with using their output to train the neural networks?
Because I have no other choice. What we're doing, right, is trying to train a pretty straightforward CNN style thing for that time when they're responding. And we're just trying to open up the threshold of what's to handle this sort of stuff, right? And so anything that looks like this, right, it's certainly a whole lot better than not having it at all. So it's not like we're saying, hey, look, this is, what we're generating is meaningful in any way. It's just being used to train a recognizer, so I'm more tolerant for when they actually respond to us. And so that gives me a certain amount of comfort in that, and we can use all these things in our data set to see if we're being successful, right? So we can do that data augmentation, see if we get better results on the mimics we had, the responses we had in the past. And so it's kind of a closed system where I can actually say, okay, is it helping or hurting?
Also, if DolphinGemma gives us some patterns from prompting, shall we say, we feel like we could throw those patterns into Uhura, Daniel Kohlsdorf's system, see if it labels those generative patterns, and if they're in our data set. I mean, it's definitely a back and forth, but I think it's potentially really productive.
Just do one more question, then we'll. Oh, actually, hold. Okay, you'll get it.
Hi. So thanks so much. So Denise had mentioned we had done earlier work that I presented here that Brenda and I did, and I'm curious about what you're getting in terms of the lack of mimicry of the contours. My question is, are you showing harmonics when you're in these signals? It looks like you're just doing a fundamental or something. Do the synthetic signals have harmonics?
Yeah, they can.
Oh, okay. I wasn't sure because I thought maybe
you're just not seeing the upper.
Okay, I couldn't tell because when we did it, we used sawtooth waveforms, and we've now had 3 groups of animals. Again, they're in captivity, so there's a lot less stimulation, and I'm wondering whether that's part of the reason because it's in the wild as well. It's just curious. They're also spotted, it's not Tursiops.
Right.
So there could be a difference there. Just wanted to mention that because we got rapid imitation in 3 studies now, or 2 studies. And Roatan. We're in a semi-open condition with right now. This is some unpublished data. But it would be curious to figure this out a little bit. But it's really exciting work.
When you see this stuff in the wild, right, there's all sorts of interesting harmonics going up the thing, but it's all this shape. When you see these things just in the data set, right, this is one of the things that Denise showed me back in 2010. Some of this head-to-head, when you're getting these sorts of things, they're manipulating those higher frequencies. I don't know if it's intentional or if it's an artifact or whatever, but to me, it looks like there's encoding happening in those higher frequencies. Now, when we're doing this for the two-way work, right, all we really care about is looking at whether or not they're responding to us, and so we actually have a filter that stops at about 5 kilohertz to get rid of the boat noise. And for, where do you stop your current system? Is it 20 kilohertz or 24? I forget. Right. So we're not looking at the higher stuff for the two-way work. All we really care about is does this follow a form that matches us. But looking at the higher stuff is fun. It's interesting.
Yeah, because you'll see a lot of our animals transposed, and they were quite flexible in terms of compressions and expansions in both time and frequency domain, and they'd be all over the place. They started.
Why it's so hard to train is because they do all these different things. But so a lot of those VCM3s, the negative space, they are in higher frequencies.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that's why they're also hard to recognize.
Yeah, it's really like going through the data, it's really fascinating to look at. And of course, this stuff doesn't propagate very far in the water, right? So unless you're doing what Denise does and are right there, you're not going to hear this stuff, from what I can tell. The whistles, of course, are designed to go 3 miles or say, hey, I'm coming. But when you're looking at this stuff, it falls off quick.
Thank you very much. We still have lots more questions, but we will continue this, and I don't want to cut into the next talk. But thank you very much, and this is to be continued. Thank you.
Test